Hello again, and welcome to yet another social studies class. And today we are starting down the road to revolution um, with a little bit about the French and Indian War, which will put us down the road to revolution. So this is the note sheet that I handed out on, well, the last day you were in school, possibly, um, before watching this, because, yeah, both classes I now have it. I wasn't sure, but both of you should have it now. Um, and it's the sheet that I said would be the first sheet. So look for the one that looks like this. Okay, now that you found that, this is the really short version of this unit. For much of the 1700s, the 13 colonies were happy being British. You might want to underline this, we're happy being British, because I'm guessing that some of you are going to think, when I ask you on a question, you're going to think that these people who came over here always wanted to start a country called the United States of America. And that's just not true. These people were happy being British. They were proud to be British. They loved being British. They had the best king in the world. They had the best country in the world. Why would they ever want to start another country than Britain? All right, but they were mostly ignored by the British government, which isn't always a bad thing. You don't want your parents to ignore you all the time, but maybe sometimes you do. And that's kind of how the colonies felt. Britain and the 13 colonies are going to fight and, spoiler alert, win a war called the French and Indian War. At least that's what we call it, is the French and Indian War. It is called the 7 Years' War if you lived up in Canada or over in Britain. That's their name for it. We'll talk about that later. Now, the problems will start after the war, after this big, glorious victory. Second video in a row where I've used the word glorious, you might know. What's going to cause the problem is that to pay for the war, Britain is going to start to enforce its laws and collect taxes on the colonies, which will make the colonies angry. This will make them angry, and events will soon lead to the Revolutionary War. Okay, but that's getting way ahead of ourselves. First, we have to talk about before all of this happened. So a little background information here, and we'll come back to this and I will help you fill it in later. Just please don't speed ahead and fast forward ahead and skip all of this glorious talking that I'm giving you today, or I will be very disappointed. And in the future, I won't help you out with the notes as much as I will here today. So, going back to we're talking about the first half of the 1700s, the first half of the 18th century. So roughly 1700 to 1750-ish. And during that time, the colonies, as you know, grew into 13 colonies. You've already asked, but this purple one is Vermont, not a colony. It's wilderness shared or just fought over between New York and New Hampshire. Why does New York look so funny? Well, because New York was not yet its present day size, mostly because this was land controlled by the Iroquois Confederacy out here. So their colony of New York was still mostly just along the Hudson River, as you know. There's the Hudson River, if you're following my little dot. All right. So there are 13 colonies. They are ruled by their mother country of Britain, which is a monarchy, which shares power with the parliament, which is a legislature, which is a group that makes laws. Each colony by this time had a royal governor, which was appointed by the crown, who had to share power with each colony's legislature, which is a group that makes laws, sometimes called an assembly. Okay. Now, that was some self-government going on because the colonies are way over here and their distant mother country is way over here, quite distant. So it's hard. You can't just jump back and forth the ocean like you can today. It was a long journey. So these colonies sort of got used to governing themselves, even though the mother country still imposed some rules on them. They imposed these rules, but they're way over here in London, so they weren't always enforced. Now, from the king's point of view, the mother country's point of view, the reason to have colonies was to benefit the mother country. And this is mercantilism or mercantilism, however you want to pronounce it, where you have the colonies bringing the mother country raw materials and other fine things for the benefit of the crown, the mother country. To enforce these laws, they passed laws called Navigation Acts, which we talked about previously and we will talk about again. This is just a picture I really like. It's a primary source that was painted back in the 1770s, so a little bit slightly after the time we're talking about now, but it gives you a really good picture of what colonial life might have been like in New England, as you know, because Massachusetts and New England, with the short growing season and rocky soil, they were not rural, living on farms. They were more closely living together in cities and communities. And shipping, shipbuilding, trade, etc., were very important to their economy. As you can see here, they're loading up these barrels onto ships for trade. And you can see it looks like some shipbuilding going on as well over here. So it's just a really cool picture of Salem, which you may know for other reasons, but this is about 80 years after that other thing that went down in Salem, which we're not going to mention right now because I'm going to stay on track. All right, so the Navigation Acts were the laws that restricted trade by the colonies to enforce the policy of mercantilism. For example, the Timber Act wood from the colonies could only be sold to Britain. But enforcement is going to be tough because they are way over here and this is a really big ocean. So as long as England got all the wood that they needed at a good price, or all of the tobacco they needed at a good price, or all of the indigo or rice that they needed at a good price, all of the stuff they needed at a good price, sure, probably some smuggling went on, selling to France or to Spain or to other countries as well. England, they probably knew this was going on, but it just wasn't worth the effort to try to stop it because it was so far away. It would have been extremely expensive. And they were doing okay with mercantilism anyway, so they kind of just ignored them. There's a word for this called salutary neglect. Salutary neglect. Neglect is generally a bad thing if you have like animal neglect or parental neglect, child neglect, where people don't take care of their children or their animals, and it's neglect, which is sad. Salutary, though, is something good, like you salute the flag, you salute things that are good. So salutary neglect means beneficial neglect. How can neglect be beneficial? Well, this was kind of the unofficial British policy of ignoring the 13 colonies and not really enforcing the laws, sort of letting them govern themselves, letting them do their own thing, and not really trying too hard to enforce laws. We'll see that works for a while, but then when trouble is going to start to brew is when England decides they're going to start enforcing these laws. But that's still down the road to revolution. So to fill in these notes here, to help you out here, by the mid 1700s, there were 13 British, this word should be British, colonies in North America. Most colonies considered themselves to be British citizens, or just British would work, and were loyal to the King and Queen of England. Even though England owned and officially ruled the colonies, the British official policy of, this word is going to be mercantilism. Mercantilism was difficult to enforce, so Britain mostly ignored the colonies and let them govern themselves. You might want to circle that. That's governing themselves, self-government, for over 100 years. And the word for this is salutary neglect. Salutary neglect, which means beneficial neglect. There you go. All right. That's going to change with the French and Indian War. So the French and Indian War is going to be not just the French versus the Indians, or this. It's going to be a big fight. It's going to be blank plus blank plus blank versus blank plus blank. Well, Uh, it is going to be England, which includes its 13 colonies, plus the Iroquois Confederacy. So England, 13 colonies, Iroquois Confederacy versus France and the Algonquin Indians. So that's what you're going to fill in those first blanks there. Is those first blanks up at the top here? That's what you're filling in. Okay, and you can pause it if you want, but I'm not going to wait for you. Okay, what caused the war? There's going to be three main causes, and they were on that sheet. I wish I'd put it again right here. Cause number one, cause number two, cause number three. So when I ask you for the causes, this is where you're going to look. It never ceases to amaze me. As soon as I start recording, that's when my phone starts blowing up, as the kids say. I don't know if kids say that actually, but anyways, cause number one is European wars. So over here this is North America, this is Europe. Hopefully you know that by now. And this is the thing, for most of the 1700s, Europe was fighting wars, constant wars, especially these two, France and England. They're neighbors here, and they just do not get along. They fight, they're constantly fighting wars. They fight a war, they stop for a little while, then they start fighting again. They stop for a little while, they start fighting. Lots of times it's due to religious differences because France was still a Catholic country, which felt that they had to bring back England into the Catholic Church. Because remember how England had left the Catholic Church to form the Church of England? And that whole Protestant Reformation thing that went on. So religious differences are one cause for the war, but there's also trade. There's also trying to dominate this area, fighting over sea rights and things like that. So there's many causes. It's not just religion. But this war that's being fought over in Europe is going to spill over into the colonies, where you have next door neighbors over here too. In red, you have the British colonies, and all of this in blue here is going to be French, from New France. So their neighbors over here, the fighting over in Europe spills over to fighting in America. So in the early to mid 1700s, Britain and France were almost always at war, often due to religious differences. A little hint, I will give you this later if you're still watching. This fighting would soon spread to the British and French colonies around the world, including North America. Cause number two, land claims, claiming land. That means the French claimed lands to the blank and blank of the 13 British colonies. Well, if we look at the map, there's New France, Quebec, the capital of New France, along the St. Lawrence River, of course. So France is going to, remember, fishing furs, France, all right, New France up here. They're going to claim lands. Here's the colonies. So as you know, this is going to be to the north and to the west, to the north and to the west of the 13 English colonies. And while it looks nice and clean on a map like this, in reality, they kind of blended together. Remember, this is wilderness. It's not clean boundaries. So this striped land is in dispute. It's not clear who the ownership is. Same with down here with New Spain and Florida here. It's not clear who the owner is. Both of them want to own it. Not only do France and England want to own it, so do the Iroquois and the Algonquin. They're going to be fighting over that land too. And remember that by this point, the Iroquois are allies with the English, and the French have their Algonquin allies. So it sort of just spills over because the French want this because of the fur trade and these rivers, which are very valuable for the fur trade. So anyways, by this point, the colonies basically were, the thing that was separating them was the Appalachian Mountains. Most of the English colonies were to the east of the Appalachian Mountains. New France was to the west. The boundary just along the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, like where Canandaigua is, is where the problem's going to start. these Appalachian Mountains, kind of until the middle of the 1700s, was like a wall that stopped settlers. But in the 1700s, some settlers started to trickle into this area and find their way through the mountains and find all this land over here. Now, the French fur traders, excuse me, sorry about that. Excuse me, sorry. Um, the French fur traders and the Algonquins were hunting furs, beaver furs, in this area when they noticed that there's starting to be some English settlers starting to come over, and that kind of annoys them. The so the French, to defend themselves, they're going to start building some forts out here to sort of establish that this land is their land. This land is not your land. This is a pretty cool picture. You can see the Appalachian Mountains here, how it would build like a wall. Canandaigua and the Finger Lakes, you can see right here. This valley, of course, is the Hudson River Valley, which cuts through there. So this is the area we're talking about, sort of just that western edge of the Appalachian Mountains. So cause two, the French claimed lands to the north and west of the 13 British colonies, including west of the Appalachian Mountains. How do you spell Appalachian? It's right there. And the French set up forts to defend its profitable fur trade and its important rivers against invasion by settlers, Settlers, some would say settlers, from the 13 colonies. Cause number 3 is going to be very closely related: the alliance with Native Americans. The French were allies and trading partners with the Algonquin. The British were allies with their enemy, the Iroquois. That's cause number 3. And the fur trade is going to spur this on. We know that the Algonquin and Iroquois had fought the Beaver Wars, and they had never really ended. There was still this constant skirmishing between the Iroquois and the Algonquin. And then when you add the British and French as allies to it, also claiming land there, it's just all the recipe for a big major war, which is what the French and Indian War was. Just to show you some perspective here, this pink area up here you can see Lake Ontario. So Canandaigua would be right in this pink area. This was the original Iroquois Confederacy territory, but then you can see how it expanded, and they expanded so that the Iroquois controlled all of this area after the Beaver Wars. So by the 1700s, now they didn't really live in these areas, but they claimed them, and the French claimed it as New France. So that's going to cause disputes right in this striped area there. And land claims also, you can see that the 13 colonies also claimed this land, because most of their land claims went all the way west, as far as the west went, which they weren't really sure yet. But many of them claimed that their land just kept going. So this is going to be all the recipe. All the conditions are right to just explode into a war. What is going to be the spark that starts the war? You're going to have to stay tuned and come back next time to find out on the next exciting chapter. Not chapter, really. The next exciting episode of the French and Indian War. Now, as your special reward for staying till the end, here are the notes which you can fill in and copy. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.